Hello everyone, Jay Whitner here with Space Headlines. We do a quick recap of what's going on each week in the space universe, and today we're going to be talking about the fourth week of March 2018. Our first story is a Russian launch from Kazakhstan, and it was carrying a crew of 3 to the International Space Station. Aboard the Soyuz were 2 US astronauts and 1 cosmonaut. They will join the existing ISS crew of 3 that's already up there. NASA, thankfully, is looking into lunar landers. They are doing some outreach to industry to see what the interest level is of industry and working jointly to develop such things. So they issued a request for information and an RFI about these lunar landers. The plan is quite logical. They want to start with small cargo landers and gradually move up to larger landers that would eventually be human rated. The U.S. space strategy is changing a little bit with an America First flavor. Some of the things that we're seeing are a reduction of regulation to streamline things a little bit. New ideas about the military in space. Some of these ideas I think make great sense. Instead of having a few exquisitely complicated, expensive, and capable satellites, they want to replace them with constellations of satellites. So instead of one big complicated one, maybe they have 20 smaller ones. The idea is diversification. In the event that an enemy somehow took out one of the satellites, if it's 1 out of 20, it's quite different than if it's 1 out of 1. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Also, in a more broad area, they're looking at more warfighting capabilities in space. There's a realization that sooner or later, regretfully, there will be conflict in space, and that we need to be prepared for that eventuality. We're seeing some restructuring talked about at NASA. NASA has a lot of internal departments, and to simplify things greatly, the Space Technology Department is perhaps going to be brought inside of the Exploration, Research, and Technology Department. The idea here is that there might be some efficiencies, maybe there's some duplication that can be avoided by this consolidation effort. But aside from the housekeeping things of structure, the 2018 budget for NASA has a nice increase for tech, 11%, which is quite nice. The 2 main areas that are getting more funding to advance things are satellite servicing, which is very important to extend the life of satellites, and very exciting, nuclear thermal propulsion. Now, nuclear thermal is not really needed, in my opinion, for activities in cislunar space, but in terms of missions that are going out beyond cislunar space, most notably, I guess, Mars missions, to send big payloads, to build a base on Mars, to send crews to Mars, thermal propulsion would be awesome. So I'm delighted to see that this is getting some funding. On a little bit of a sad note, we've been hearing rumors for a while that the James Webb Space Telescope might be postponed. The news is NASA has confirmed it. They're now saying that the James Webb is not going to launch until May of 2020. So roughly 2 years from now. This is a delay of a year from what they've been saying before. And the backstory on all this is if the total mission cost goes over $8 billion, Congress has to reauthorize the program. So it's likely that this is going to be required because as things stretch out, the cost gets higher because you have just more years of carrying the staff and the team and the facilities that are involved. So James Webb will be delayed, but most likely Congress will reauthorize it. It's sort of in the too big to fail category. Florida Spaceport wants to be able to have more launch capacity. Florida launches roughly a fourth of worldwide launches, so it's a very busy place. And they'd like to be able to do 48 launches a year. That's their goal. I believe that they're trying to get there on a 5-year basis to get up to 48 launches a year. The basic ideas here are twofold. They want to reduce launch scrubs. They have a certain number of windows that are available, and they don't want to lose a window due to unnecessary launch scrubs. So for example, sometimes a launch might be scrubbed because two fishermen in a fishing boat go where they're not supposed to go, so now they're in the theoretical footprint of a problem launch. So in the past, they would have scrubbed the launch. So now they're going to be doing more of an evaluation, like, well, is it a cruise ship with 1,000 people aboard, or is it a rowboat with one person in it, and make the decisions accordingly. The other thing they're working on is to modernize electronics. Believe it or not, some of the electronics that are located in Kennedy Space Center and the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station date back for decades. And by modern standards, they're just stone knives and bear skins. So a big push to modernize the electronics that are offered and utilized at these space facilities to be able to pick up the volume. The Europa mission. If you're not familiar with this, Europa is a moon of Jupiter that scientists have long theorized might be a good candidate to find primitive life, bacteria or something on Europa. So people want to do a mission there to see. And the idea is they want to save money and make the mission simpler. So the ways that they're looking at doing this are the mission used to have a dedicated communications relay. They are removing that. I don't know if they really specified how they're removing it. I would suspect that they're going to have like a bigger antenna on the actual unit itself, or maybe a stronger power source, something like that. They also want to simplify the science of the mission. This is going to launch hopefully in the mid-2020s, and they are planning to fly the mission on a Space Launch System rocket. So obviously there's a little bit of a conflict here to use an SLS rocket and to save money on the mission, because SLS is going to be extremely expensive. However, the trade-off is the SLS is going to get the mission done faster. The stronger the rocket is, the faster the probe gets there. So that's what they'll be trying to evaluate moving forward, is that question of cost versus speed. SpaceX had some progress on their plan for satellite internet. This is, you've heard of the Starlink. And the news is the FCC has approved their paperwork for doing the Starlink plan. So the exciting part of this is the number of satellites that are involved. It's a multi-phase situation, but the big phase, the early phase, is 4,000 plus satellites in low Earth orbit. And this is supposed to be starting into operation in the mid-2020s. So it's a real eye-opener in terms of the traffic flow and interactions between satellites. And they're not the only company that wants to launch these larger satellite constellations. So there's some perhaps some juggling that's going to be involved. More SpaceX news. They continue to accelerate their launch cadence at SpaceX. And the news was they were planning to do 2 launches in 4 days. Now this report that we're doing here covers the 4th week, so we're only really talking about the first launch. But the first launch was successful. It launched from Vandenberg, carrying some Iridium satellites into orbit. The second launch is pertaining to the International Space Station. It's a resupply mission using the Dragon. And 2 launches in 4 days, if pulled off, would be a very nice step, especially since they're launching from opposite sides of the country. So presumably there's separate launch teams and a lot of complications that arise from doing it from 2 different launch facilities. But perhaps the most exciting news to me that came out in the 4th week of March came from Robert Zubrin. Of course, Zubrin is famous for his Mars advocacy for decades. His Mars plan is known as Mars Direct, and he has come out with a new plan called Moon Direct. If you've been following the news, he's been a an outspoken critic of the Lunar Orbital Platform Gateway in terms of it not being necessary. So he's advocating a different architecture for a lunar return, and it involves SpaceX hardware. He wants to have 3 Falcon Heavies and 1 Falcon 9 with a Dragon. And with those assets, he feels we could have a lunar base in operation by 2022, which is really exciting. It's only 4 years from now. The way this would work is the 3 Falcon Heavies would carry cargo to the moon to set up a base. And the capability is if you pair a Falcon Heavy with an oxygen-hydrogen lander, that you can soft land 12 tons of material on the lunar surface. So between 3 Falcon Heavies, this gives you enough to create a small base near one of the poles. And they think that it would be affordable. The cost to set it up would be fairly reasonable because of the affordable cost of SpaceX launching. And the cost to sustain the base, he's projecting at about $700 million a year. And on a federal level, $700 million a year is approximately zero. And even on a NASA level, it's a fairly manageable percent of the NASA budget. So exciting news from Robert Zubrin. That's all of our coverage for the 4th week of March 2018. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you in a week or so, and we'll talk about early April. Take care.